Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs and share our experience to hopefully help you have your best game.
Hello, Jeremy.
Hello, how are you?
Still recovering a little bit from my feeling under the weather, but other than that, I'm doing pretty good.
Good. Glad to hear that. I'm going to try out headphones today because last week I had to putter with the audio because there was a little bit of echo because my new mic sits. I guess the mic picked it up, whereas the one I used to have on the springy boom did not. But
fair enough.
No big deal. So
yeah,
we're going to re-record and revisit, in so doing, the episode that we had recorded when I was out there in Ohio, but the audio was crap. It was crazy. I had cranked it all the way up, the input, and it just didn't pick things up.
Just didn't function properly.
Yeah. All right. So, okay. So what we were going to talk about is this campaign that I'm running right now, that we are now several sessions in. Where did we want to go with that? Where do we want to start with that? Because we have a little bit of information I think that we've talked about, but let's go ahead and establish the foundation here for people who might not know what the heck we're talking about and therefore why they would want to listen to this.
Yeah, so I think it's easy to just start with, so what is this campaign you're running? Why don't you, I know we've talked about this before on the podcast, but why don't you give us just the quick flyby of what the campaign is?
Okay, so I had taken a couple of months off from running, and during that time, we had talked about this actually before I took these couple of months off, that we had talked about all different kinds of things about like what system we wanted to play, and what genre and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, we narrowed it down and we decided, and this was kind of crazy, I think, to an extent, for people who know me, but I'm running Pathfinder First Edition. And the reason I'm running Pathfinder First Edition is because I wanted to run an Eberron campaign, and I did not want to use 5e because many reasons. And I did not want to use 3.5. 3.5, if you've not played it, there's a lot in it that I say would compete with, say, 5th edition. But Pathfinder First Edition is definitely a mechanical refinement of 3.5. And the difference therefore between them is minor. So anyway, wanted to run Eberron, didn't want to, I thought about converting it to my Aris 2D20, all this garbage. I said, screw it, let's just take the easiest path here. And I found an old adventure path from like 2017 or 2018 called the Ironfang Invasion, which is like, it's kind of like Red Dawn, but with hobgoblins instead of Russians. I took a couple months off, did a lot of reading, did a lot of planning, and then we started. And I think we're like 5 some sessions in. The first book in the campaign, I don't remember, all these Pathfinder Adventure Paths in days of old were all 6 books and usually went from first level to somewhere in the teens. I am only going to do the first 3 because Pathfinder, I think, collapses by the time you hit about 10th level. And so the story in this first book is cleanly broken into 4 main parts, and we just finished the first part of it. And if you're not familiar with Eberron, we have an episode. We talked a little bit about Eberron not too long ago. We should probably revisit that because there's so much more. But I think I'm having I know I'm having a good time slowly teasing out and slowly releasing like things about the world that fit the story, because they fit this campaign really, really well. Obviously, since this was a Pathfinder campaign, it was set in Paizo's world of Galarian, and it was, there were some things that were linked to the lore of that, but making those changes to Eberron has been really easy, and it's flowed really well.
Good. Well, how did you introduce your players to this new campaign? Because I know when we talked last, you had discussed how you kind of didn't want them to realize it was a Red Dawn type situation
Yes.
immediately. So how did you kind of drop them into the world and start scattering out this idea of, hey, you're in Eberron without completely giving away the plan that you had?
This and here's GMs. Here's your GM advice. Um, and not like, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, but I don't hardly think that like I'm the master GM. But there are times when you know how it is. You're doing something. You're like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. This works. So here's my bit of GM advice based on what I did. Normally, and I ask you this, James, either your experience as a GM or as a player, you pick up a module, you as a GM prepare for it, you sell it to your players in some way, shape, or form, which usually comes in the form of saying, hey, this campaign is about X, Y, and Z. And then you start it,
Correct.
right?
You start from page one.
Boom. First encounter. You're standing outside the Tomb of Horrors. You're outside the village of Hamlet. You're making your way to the keep on the borderlands, blah, blah, blah. Now, what I did is I said, listen, I really want to run a campaign in Eberron. I want to, and so here's the big picture of Eberron. So I gave them that. And then I said, I'd like to run it in this area. And I would like for your characters to be from this country. And here's why. And here's the status. This is 2 years after this big war has ended. You're living in this like in the middle of nowhere, like frontier town that's trying to scrape to get by. And your three of the four players decided that their character had been in the military, like just at the tail end of the war because they're still young. And another one decided that he was like just a civilian scout. So okay, that fits perfectly. So instead of jumping right into the adventure, I decided I was like, okay, I'm going to do like a session 0.5, not a session 0, but a session 0.5. Well, actually, what I thought about is, all right, we made our characters together, and then I said, all right, I'm gonna run. This is what I'm saying in my head. I'm gonna run a short adventure that is going to give them an opportunity to get in a fight and use some of their skills because none of them had played Pathfinder or like hadn't played it in forever. And so I wanted them to tell me what are the sharp edges of a D20 fantasy game character? It's combat.
Right. Combat and abilities.
Yeah. And so what I wanted them to do was make their character and then have an opportunity to use those things to see like, okay, did what I build, does it actually kind of do what I wanted it to do? So we did that. And I thought, all right, I'm just going to have them, attacked by a band of, crappy little goblins that go after their little mining caravan as they're making their way back to town. And then after that, and I threw in a little bit of foreshadowing that at the time didn't hit at all with any of the characters. I had them on one of the goblins was like a military challenge coin that had an insignia on it. And they're like, oh, okay, they just pocket that. Nothing else added to it. And then the next session, they're back in town. And I say, okay, it's been like a day or two, and talk about some of the things. I had a big map of the town, showed them where things are, talked about some of the NPCs. They went around and interacted with some of them. And then they go over to the tavern that evening. And this is what happened was like, I felt like they had such a positive response to this just like setup adventure, this like session 0.5 thing. And I realized like actually the idea of using the challenge coin with the insignia on it was something I just made up in the moment. It just came to me. Then I was like, oh man, I can foreshadow other crap too. And they'll have no idea. So in the second session, they're at the tavern and they hear about this whole kerfuffle about two locals who were making their way to town as part of like a wagon train from some farms and some like law enforcement. If you're familiar with Eberron at all, House Sentinel or House Beneath Sentinel Marshals, which are like the U.S. Marshals of the whole continent. They show up, they wave their badges around, they get all like official and stuff, and they bag these two guys and they take them off. They're like, what the heck is going on? And so the little town is in kind of an uproar. So the PCs are like, well, we're just going to look into this because that just sounds a little murky.
Well, and even if it's true, knowing that these marshals are here is going to be important to know.
And also maybe having an idea like, hey, well, these two locals were wanted criminals. Like, what's the deal with that? So they make their way out, and it turns out that it's totally fake, that these are not House Deneath Sentinel marshals. These are bounty hunters with forged documents that just like overawed the townies. And so a little bit of research, they capture one of the bounty hunters and they persuade him to talk. And they learn that there is a noble from Thrain, which is a neighboring country that had been at war with Breland, the country where the PCs are from, at the end of the war, who has set out a bounty on any surviving members of a specific unit. And it just so happens I had mentioned that there were two units that had deactivated in that area when the war ended, and so if any of the PCs wanted to have been members of they could. So I had one of my player's characters was in that unit. So he's like, oh, hey now. So then I threw in a little more.
Good to know.
Yeah. So I threw in a little more background about the world and like about the end of the war and how this unit was involved in some like black ops at the end of the war and, you know, maybe wiped out some Thrains to rescue some prisoners. And maybe there's a Thrainish noble now who's, you know, got a wild hair and wants post-war revenge. And so my players go home that night fully thinking that that's what the campaign is about.
We're going to go fight this noble that has problems with our friend.
That's right. That's right. And like Chuck Norris just died, so there's all kinds of Mission MIA references and stuff like that. So yeah, maybe that must be it. Well, that has nothing to do with the campaign. The actual campaign as written has this hobgoblin army emerging from a magical portal almost in the middle of town and invading. So the next time they're in town, like celebrating their victory, having gotten back these two, you know, people who'd been kidnapped, that's when this happens. And I did so what was nice is that the meat of the campaign, the actual plot, was a total surprise, but the context in which it took place was something with which they were already becoming familiar. And because they had had interactions with some of the different townies, it was like, oh yeah, you know, such and such, the you know, the barmaid, you know, she's running from the hobgoblin. Well, they got to save her. And like the guy who's the innkeeper is like, you know, an old soldier. All right, so let's grab him, and he can help us organize some refugees, and we're going to escape the town and things like that. So instead of just starting cold, where you're essentially asking your players to care about anything but their characters because they're in the story, I actually started laying the groundwork so they started to feel like they were invested.
Right, because there's nothing better than being dropped into a campaign as the four of you meet in a tavern. You've never seen each other, but now you have to get together to save these people you don't know. Like,
right.
This, at least they have some investment. So how did the Hobgoblin invasion start? How did it go, like, with your players? Were they expecting it? Did they know how to deal with it? Like, did they have any idea what the campaign wanted them to do?
So I had to nudge them a bit on that last question, I feel like. But no, they had no idea. There was the map provided of the town in the book sets it up as this small circular like hamlet with a big green in the middle of town, and then there's a river just north of town, like 100 yards north of town, and a bridge over it. And I had because Eberron has 12 moons. And so what I decided was that you don't have a full moon. You have some nights where you have multiple full moons periodically. And then so I decided, this is just making it up as I went, that there is every 5 to 6 weeks or so, several of the larger moons are all full or near full together. And so I called that Bright Night. That was super clever. And so when Bright Night happens, that's when you have the farm festival. That's when you have
Makes sense.
the farmers market. And so farmers and others and merchants and people living in the corona, the outside of this little like 200 person burg, they all come into town, and merchants and horrible bards and stuff like that, they all set up in this green that is the middle of town. So there's all kinds of festivities and dwarf tossing and all that fantasy stuff. So that's what's going on. And they were in the tavern yucking it up with their people they knew. And then they hear all these like loud noises, and they're like, oh, that must be part of the celebration or something like that. And then boom, 2 hobgoblin soldiers kick in the door, and they like shoot some people with crossbows, and it's on. Now, something that I did prior to that is maybe I actually think that this is bad form per D&D norms. But I said, screw it, because I think this makes sense. I asked them, because there was their employer, this guy who has a couple of mining claims. I said, oh, he has like a couple of tents and a little building on the outskirts of town where he sets up his stuff. So when you guys are in town between jobs up on the mining claims, like you have a place to, that's part of your compensation. You got a place to sleep. So I said, so on the evening of Bright Night, that Friday night, when all the festivities are going on, like when you go into town, which is like, a 200-yard walk from their little camp, I said, what do you bring with you? Like, what are you wearing? And I had one character who has chainmail, and the rest had 2 had leather, and 1 had no armor at all because he's a sorcerer. And one guy was like, look, my sword is an heirloom. I carry it with me everywhere. I was like, okay, people are used to seeing you with that. No one's going to mind that. But he's like, I'm not wearing my chainmail to the bar.
Right. Which most people, like a normal person on a festival day, like, no, I'm probably going to wear my nice clothes and go hang out with everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
But the norm
is not your full kit.
Oh, right. I'm the fighter in plate mail, and I have a shield and a pike, and I'm sitting there ordering mead. Like, that is the dumbest. I get it. If you're just traveling, you're showing up off the road. Okay, that's one thing. But if you live in town, so consequently, my players' characters were woefully under-equipped when the fantasy poop hit the fan. And that became a real problem.
Luckily, one guy had a sword.
One guy has a sword. Some of the other ones, everyone's got a dagger. Right. And they start grabbing things, and they kill the 2 hobgoblins, and they take some of their kit, and they immediately start organizing people. Now, initially, this is where it's always fascinating, published adventures, because published adventures, and I've published adventures, you have to make a series of assumptions as to what you think the players are going to do. And so to an extent, you almost have to push them. This adventure has a whole bunch of assumptions. And of course, my players decided to circumvent most of them. So to your question of like, well, what did they do? How did they react? Their first reaction was, let me ask you this. If you were the PC, what would your first reaction be?
As soon as I got out of the tavern and realized this was a full-scale invasion and not just a few random hobgoblins, I'm booking it. I'm getting out of town as fast as possible because I can't fight an army. I'm going to assume these are level 1 characters. So yes.
And one of the things too, it's fascinating actually, because the authors were explicit about, like, you as GM, you have to make clear that this is not a fight they can win. There are 30 or 40 hobgoblins immediately evident in town, like running around through this center area where this, all the festivities are taking place. So they're like, well, that crap ain't gonna work.
Then the first thing I'm doing is I'm getting out. So that's what I would think.
Right. So that's immediately what they sought to do.
But that's not what they had expected with the adventure?
Well, here's the odd thing, okay? There are several noteworthy locations that make up that are in this circle around the town. There's the inn. There's a general goods store. There's another store. And then there is a temple or shrine. So those are like the 4 main places where the adventure is written so that the PCs could start in any of those locations. 2 hobgoblins always kick in the door and kill somebody. But one of the things that's baked into the adventure that's kind of neat. I like it. It's there is a subsystem to handle group survival.
Mm.
Like where you have NPC classes and you have to say, well, we need foraging, we need hunting, we need security, we need building things, so there actually is a system for use later in the story as the PCs now become like the head of a partisan band of sorts, or at least a band of refugees they're trying to protect. So one of the things that is assumed is that each of these different places, well, there are supplies. There's food in the inn. There's food and stuff and like tarps and whatnot in the dry goods store, all these kinds of things that they can grab. And so at each of the locations, it says if the PCs start here, they can get this many points worth of resources because the system is based in this abstraction of like resource points. And I looked at that and I realized, wait, that assumes that the players immediately grok the idea that, okay, we're going to be a partisan band. We've just been attacked, but we're going to become a partisan band and we're going to we need supplies.
That would not be my top 5 assumptions.
No. And how are you going to fight?
Right. Yeah.
As you're lugging a cheese wheel.
Correct.
Or cask of mead.
Well, and
bag of bread bowls.
So with all of this, like, is there a certain amount they expect you to do? Like, is there a like, hey, we expect you to only clear the one place and go, or did they really expect you to go to every single location?
No. Here's the funny thing: the way the adventure is written, and it had been so long since I'd run anything from Paizo, I forgot about this. Like they adhere to their systems like HR is watching. It's ridiculous. And so the assumption is that the PCs will immediately get this idea of like, well, we were in the tavern and we saved the people in the tavern. Well, we better go to these other places. There must be people in those places. We need to save them too and haul off all the cheese wheels and the casks of wine and water and cheese, blah, 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 all this other stuff. And the really ridiculous thing about this is that by the end of this first chapter, in this adventure, it says like if you're going to milestone the characters, they should move to second level at the end of this. Now, the way Paizo writes its adventures is when they say that they're just giving you like a reminder of, hey, listen, if you do all the encounters in this block of the book, your characters will advance. Well, I went through and added up all the XP rewards. And if you were actually counting experience points, the PCs would have to do every single encounter, every fight. They would have to uncover every secret hidden stash of magic stuff that happens to be in Jim Bob's store. They would have to like get at least, I think it was 10 or 12 refugees for which they get 50 XP each. I mean, to gain the 8,000 experience points that a 4-character first level party would need to advance to second level, you would have to do every single one of these things.
But that goes against the make them recognize that this is not a fight they can win if you have to fight every hobgoblin to get the XP.
Well, it's not fighting every hobgoblin. What it's doing is it's fighting like, okay, the 2 hobgoblins that are ransacking this store, or the one hobgoblin who's like pissing on the altar in the it's not. You're only.
So you just have to fight everyone that they say and survive as level 1 characters.
Yes,
and then
multiple fights.
Totally reasonable. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, but wait, there's more. The bridge, because the assumption is you're going to go over the bridge and escape by going over the river, and you're going to hide in the Fangwood Forest, which totally does.
Which is that what they did?
Well, no. What they first decided was, hey, the inn, if the town is a circle, the inn is at like the 2 o'clock position. At least that's where I had it. And the river is just above that.
Okay.
So they're like, F it, let's just get to the river and cross.
Makes sense.
They're like, we're not going to run up to the bridge because I had already established that the bridge had 2 lanterns on it. They're like, we're going to be seen. We're not. That's stupid. And so then I'm like, this is what's going on in my head. I'm like, river's too wide. It's too fast flowing. You can't, it's like 8 feet deep. Too fast flowing, 8 feet deep, you have injured.
Makes sense.
And so they look at the map and they're like, what's that little building right on the, I'm like, it's like a fishing, like, does it have a rowboat? Like, see, that's the players. They're going to be clever.
Right.
And the hard thing about this was that I'm thinking to myself, like, unless I were to have told them, okay, listen, this is all about an invasion that you're not going to be able to fight off, but you're going to recover and become partisan. So what you need to do when like that just,
That's railroading.
it kills the fun.
Yeah, you're railroading your players, which I know most players don't enjoy. Like if you went in and told them you need to do all of this, I'm gonna feel like you've taken away my agency, and I have to just follow the given steps.
Yeah, and then beyond that, also it you gut it of the surprise, you know, and the
Correct.
excitement of like, how do I deal with this situation? So, long story short, there was only one rowboat. They got the wounded across, and then they're like, okay, we're going to make our way along the riverbank up to like crouch down. And the topography helped hide them, so they're going to get up to the bridge. Well, to cross the bridge is this CR4 encounter. It's like some badass hobgoblin captain, 2 other hobgoblins, and a warg on the bridge.
So you have the Jack Reacher of hobgoblins and his 2
There you
buddies
go.
and his giant dog to
That's
fight
right.
before you get out after who knows how many fights that you've already
Right.
done.
Right. Yeah. So
That's a choice.
What I did was when they got to the bridge and they sought to get across it, and Jack Reacher Hobgoblin saw them. Before he saw them, he and his 2 cronies noticed the rowboat going across, because the river flows from northwest to southeast, and the bridge is like north of town. So the river flows past the town toward the south. So they're on the bridge. They look downriver, and what do they see? They see someone furiously rowing across. So what he does is he dispatches Frick and Frack, his 2 guys, run down the north bank of the river and capture them. So I shrunk the size of the encounter by 2 hobgoblins, and I demoted the warg to just a mere wolf.
There we go. That's more reasonable.
Yeah.
After fights for level 1.
And that was just that, GM in the moment kind of stuff. But they escaped. And then what I did was, because they were just like, F it, we're getting out of here. We're going to take they had 11 people total that they had gotten from the tavern, and they were just going to leave with no supplies and nothing. And I was like, headaches. So then I have them as they are. We ended the session with them they're getting across the bridge. They killed the hobgoblin and the wolf. And I have them, one of them looks back, and I handled this over Discord. I just dropped this on them as like things to individual players. There were some people behind another building that like must have seen them, and now they're trying to run. So it's like there are more refugees. You're all good. You can't just be like, screw you, run faster.
Right.
So the next session involved them helping some other people get out of town, and then they got some alchemical fertilizer and they blew up the bridge. And now they're on the other side, and they make their way up into the woods.
So I have a question from all of this.
Yeah, hit it.
Did they remember the boat? Because that's a big resource that you would then have.
Yes, however.
Okay.
The problem is the rowboat, and if you saw a map of this, it would all make sense. The rowboat, because the river is flowing from north to south, all right, which is away from, and they were heading roughly north into the forest, and the forest is like a skirt many miles wide at the base of these very large mountains that separate the seawall mountains. If you have a map of Eberron, they separate Dargun, which is the nation of hobgoblins from which this invasion came, from Breland. So the farther the party gets away with their refugees, the farther upland and into rugged mountainous terrain they go. The rowboat is already downstream from them.
Downstream, and
and they don't have a need in the short term for a rowboat, so they leave the rowboat behind.
Okay.
So now the last 2 sessions I had, the last session rather, they made their way like 20 miles up into the hills, 15-20 miles up into the hills, and now they are trying to set up a camp so they can have some kind of stability for the refugees. Now, this is assumed. This is part of the adventure, and it makes sense. You arrange the geography such that the party can't just run away easily.
Right. You don't put a big city like right over there that they can
No,
run to, and yeah, makes sense.
no. As a matter of fact, the nearest other settlements are a couple of days away, either north or south. And the way that I already
Okay.
established that the way the terrain is and the way rivers are and things like that, they're pretty much cut off by having blown up the bridge to
Right.
protect themselves.
Okay, so they're heading to set up camp. Is that all the further you got, or did they do anything else?
That's how far we got. But then
Okay.
the intention for the next session here in a couple of days is that as the camp gets set up, and I roll out a slightly streamlined version of the fiddly camp survival management rules in the book, we there is a need, and the piece the players already were like, well, we need to figure out what's going on in the town. We need to figure out, is this a raid or is this an invasion? What are the numbers we're talking about? Because if ever we can get to Sterngate, or we can get to New Seer, or we can get somewhere else, if there's anybody we can let know what has happened, we should be able to. We need to give them accurate information.
Right.
So the plan is, after a couple of days of kind of getting the camp established and assigning work and things like that, the plan is that the PCs will head back and scout the area around the town and see what's going on.
Very normal PC behavior.
Yeah, and totally rational. It makes perfect sense. Now, the nice thing is that the module anticipates this, and there are two different kind of categories of encounters. There are location-based encounters, and then there are just like time-based encounters. So that's actually very helpful. So as they explore the Fangwood Forest, there are places they will get to know, and there are dangers and challenges that have nothing to do with this invasion that are just in the forest. And then there are those that do. And some of them, again, are things that are just meant to, like, like initially, well, I'm not going to say anything because I know that at least one of my players listens. So, like, there are things that will happen that I have a sequence. Like, this is going to happen at some point, and then this next thing, and then this next thing. And then there are others that are location based. And then as they do those things, there's a greater story about this invasion that they are going to be able to learn as they pick up evidence and they learn things and they watch the hobgoblins develop their plans and things like that. And the long story short, it's much bigger than their piddly little town. Like there's a master plan involved here that as they learn more and as things develop on the hobgoblin side and as the PCs increase in power and the players increase in knowledge, they will be able to deal with.
Makes perfect sense. Sounds like a very standard like campaign trajectory for them to be going through. But yeah, it sounds like it's a ton of fun. I would love to play this.
I don't know what it is about Eberron. It's like my wife really likes Cholula sauce, like Cholula hot sauce, and I it's okay. It's take it or leave it. But Tabasco sauce for me is like elixir of life. It is just the right flavor, and people, why? Because it is. It just Eberron just has so much to it. It like I'm not a big fan of any kind of role playing that's used to like work out your real world angst. It's tiring. But it's handy when a world offers things that are recognizable so that, like in teacher talk, we talk about prior knowledge. Like when your students have prior knowledge about something, they're able to process something new and grapple with something new differently than if it's just like totally new and there's no connection to anything they know. And the nice thing about Eberron as a setting is that there are lots of things politically and economically and technologically that all make sense because they mirror some connections in the real world, but the authors made the magic stuff and all the fantasy stuff just fit really well with this. And again, if you haven't listened to that episode where we just talked about some Eberron, you should go back and do that. And when I talk about Eberron, I'm only talking about the original Eberron that came out for 3.5 and its entire collection of books. I'm not definitely not going to talk about 4th edition. And I just think that 5th edition, they watered down some of the canon, and they really watered down the mechanics of especially the dragon marks. But whatever, that's not playing a role in this campaign. So what else? What else do you want to know about this?
To be honest, I really just want to keep hearing what's going to happen because it sounds like it's going to be a great campaign, but I also don't want to ruin it for your players who listen. So this might be something we have to return to later and walk through and see because I really am enjoying the way this type of story is set because it is a standard fantasy type adventure like Path, but in a very different like type of story. So you're getting a very like this explains why players grow and why characters become heroes and do these types of things. But you're not normally put in this type of situation. It's usually while we're bouncing back and forth between these like monster A and monster B and marauding group C.
Yeah.
Here it's like no, you have a set like problem that we need to fix as players from almost the very beginning. And then you're working your way and gaining experience, but also prestige as you go through and deal with this.
Yeah, the other thing too about it that I think sets it apart as a campaign is that for a long period of time, in fact for most of it, really, it removes the town as a place of rest. You know, you go to the dungeon, then you go to the town, right? You go to the swamp,
Right.
you go to the town. You know, you resupply, you sell. If you really want to play like, contemporary D&D, you go find the magic shop and you kit up and nope, it's you in the wilderness and you're cut off.
Right. You have to figure it all out with what you have.
Yes. And because there is a bigger story to it, it makes sense that like as the story becomes the seriousness of the invasion and the extent of it and the goals and the animating ideas behind it, as those things start to come to the fore, the player characters will have added levels and probably collected, stuff, some magic items and things like that they will be able to then deal with those higher level threats as they go from fighting the hobgoblin soldiers to trying to figure out how to pull the rug out from underneath the hobgoblin commander's plans. Though their knowledge and their power will grow over time. But the nice thing is that another thing too is, like I said, that because there's no town, there is nothing to distract them. It's like they have to deal with these refugees. They have 26 of them. So they're 4 players and have 26 refugees. It's a group of 30 total. They have to deal with that. They have to manage those people. But it's not like they can go. There's a kind of a cleanliness to not having the possibility of like, what side plot what navel gazing side plot does your character want to do?
Right.
It's like
I do. As you were talking, I did come up with one question. How did you re-outfit your players since they left all of their stuff back in the town?
Okay. So one, when they ran off with some stuff like from the tavern, so they got a couple things there, and stole, took weapons from the hobgoblins. Okay, so that's a little bit. The one business where some of these other people were running from, when they ran back to help them get across the bridge, those people were like, there's more people hiding in the cellar. So they go into the cellar and there's stuff down there that they grab. And it's like, have you seen the original Red Dawn with Patrick Swayze?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. You have good parents. So you remember the scene when they stop at that guy's gas station and they're just grabbing all the crap and they grab the football, which then they're seen throwing like an hour later. Like, so there was that moment in the cellar of, and then they see, because again, I had established the PCs had been working for the same employer for the last several months as manual labor / security at these 2 mining claims. So they'd go up into the mountains, they'd do some work, they would protect the little ore shipment back to town, and then go back up when there was more work, more holes to dig in the ground. And in the adventure, there is this alchemical shop where the guy makes stump remover, which is like an explosive of some sort. So I said, when they're down in the cellar of that, yeah, you see 3, barrels, and you recognize, they're like, what's in them? I'm like, yeah, you recognize them. That's the stuff your employer buys to like blow holes in the side of a mountain to dig mines. And they're like, oh, we're taking that. So they ran away with 3 of those and used 1 to blow up the bridge. And they reminded me last week, they're like, we still have those 2 casks of explosives. I'm like, yes, I know you do. So
Let's see what crazy shenanigans you get up to with that.
exactly. So yeah, they did kit out a little bit. And then what I did was just, I mean, I think the norms in fantasy games now make it too easy. Everything is too easy on the players. Like you're guaranteed everyone's a winner. I don't like that. But on the other hand, like it still is supposed to be a fun escape. So making everything a grueling slog is silly. So what I did was when they got across the river and they blew the bridge, some of the new refugees who were with them were guys from a logging camp that was like 2 miles or 3 miles north up the river, but on their side of the river. So they're like, okay, we're going to the camp. That's where we're going to, it's like midnight. They're all beat up and whatnot. So they go to the logging camp. Now, if there's a big festival in town, most of the loggers are where?
In town.
Yeah. So you got a couple of poor guys there who drew the shortest straw and are left at the camp to watch the stuff and make sure nobody runs off with it. So I'm like, okay, so you got some axes, you got some tools, you got some guys' weapons that got like a bow or 2 that got left behind. So they were able to resupply with the weapons that they and other supplies basically that they had left behind. So it's like, okay, now after making it difficult on you for a session and some, now you are on more solid ground now that everything is started.
But I think that's a very fair and like organic way to give them the stuff they need.
Yeah, it felt like it made sense at the table and within the story. Like it served a need. It served a need that the game has to enable the players more often than not to operate freely, by their design of their character. But it also served the story because they had a challenge where they didn't have their stuff, and now they're able to run off with other people's stuff that made sense that it was there.
Right.
Yeah. And lastly, now that I have 26 refugees and the system that's in the book requires that I assign NPC classes to all of them so that they can be factored into all the roles to make sure they, so Paizo, it's like accountants and HR, like that's the animating spirit of that. But what I did was I used an AI system to generate names, and I generated a roster where I'm able to keep track, and I'm going to give one to the players, and then I have one that I'm keeping for some extra notes. Because I've already established that like one of the characters, there's a character that Paizo put in there, Auburn the Green, who's this like, awesome ranger cleric, and is supposed to be the font of all answers and knowledge and stuff like that. It's almost like it's kind of an annoying character actually, because it's meant to provide local information to the PCs, but it really comes across as kind of like hand of the GM Mary Sue kind of character. So I made her a drunk, who actually several days into being in the mountains is going to start to have problems because she's going to run out of grog. And I'm starting to establish like there's a girl who's starting to follow around one of the PCs. And there's, it's just stuff like that. I'm trying to breathe some personality. And so I have this roster and I'm keeping notes like who likes this person. And I have like one guy who's like the town's bookkeeper. And I already decided he's like, who, oh my golly, who's the character from The Princess Bride? Is it Vicini?
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I cannot remember the name, but I know who
it's
you're talking about.
Vicini or Vincini or something like never, inconceivable, that guy.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, that's what he looks like. That's what he comes across as. That's usually what I do, by the way, is I will find, if I have prominent NPCs, I will find pictures of characters from movies or comic book, things like that, and I'll plug them in. So I'm like, he sounds like such and such. He comes across like, and it's easy. Then your players can.
Well, then people just automatically know, hey, I get what you're saying there.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to flesh out the NPCs in their merry band, and to give them something, like I said, to keep track of it. And then I've got my roster where I'm going to keep some additional notes as to like who likes whom and who's a pain in the butt and stuff like that.
Nice. It sounds like you have this all set up to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited. It's going well so far.
That's great.
All right. Well, I will keep you posted. And maybe at some point in the not too distant future, we can talk about all the other great things about Eberron. Like maybe talk about like a nation or two or something like that. We can talk offline and make sense of that.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
All right, cool. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes.